Again, welcome everyone to the last video panel of the Fasten Off Yarnalong. Four of our wonderful participating designers are here to answer questions that are submitted by our participants. I'm your host, I'm Marieke, I'm in the Netherlands. I'm one of the Fasten Off Yarnalong organizing volunteers. That's a mouthful. I'm Dutch. I'm doing my best to translate immediately in my head, but bear with me if I can't find the correct word immediately. We have four designers, and we're lucky to have with us Laurie from Eclory Designs, Jen from Synaptic Stitches, Woolly Wormhead, and Shayna from Shayna Lines Designs. I'm going to paste their info in the chat so you can check out their websites if you want. Please, designers, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your design business and how you got started. Let's start with Shayna. How did you start as a designer?
Hi, my family is trying to call me right now, and I'm like, what a terrible time. And I've hit I've hit decline 4 times. Oh my gosh. They are not stopping. Okay, I'm
How about
sorry.
I
Hi.
go?
Yeah,
I'll go, you answer.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Laurie Harrison of Eclory Designs. I design exclusively in Tunisian crochet. I do garments and accessories, so, shawls, cowls, hats, stuff like that. I got into designing probably 7 or 8 years ago, and part of it was I had started doing Tunisian crochet, fell in love with it, and it really wasn't very popular back then, so there weren't a lot of designs out there, and I had to start making my own if I wanted, I kind of ran out of stuff that I wanted to do, so I had to start making my own, and in that process, I also wanted to be able to share that with everybody else. So instead of just creating designs, I learned how to write designs and release them and all those type of things. So I've been doing that now for, I think, about 7 or 8 years. And I just love it. Tunisian crochet is definitely my favorite medium of, crochet, Tunisian, and knitting. So.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. We're really happy that you brought Tunisian crochet to more of us. I have on my list next Woolly. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Woolly from Woolly Wormhead Designs. I actually started designing in 2025. It's going to be 20 years ago, or 20 years since I published my first patterns. I've been designing since I was a kid. I actually was blogging in the early blogging days and talking about a lot of fiber art stuff. And when I lost my job, I was medically retired from teaching. I had what was then called a complete breakdown, but I now know to be total autistic burnout. So I was kind of like lost my job, and I need to keep my brain and my fingers busy and ticking over. And so that's when I started writing down my patterns and started publishing them, and then it just grew from there. Really, it was a need to do something, and that's where it came from. I'd always been into hats. I always have been since I was a kid. They've always been my favorite area to play with. I've got a background in engineering, fine art, textiles, that specializes in sculpture and education, so they kind of like come together in what I'm doing. That was kind of like the perfect marriage of everything, and this is actually the longest I've ever done anything in my entire life as well. It's just kind of like so that's how I came into designing. It was more a need to do something, and because I'm unemployable, it's I have to make it my income. So
yeah, I recognize that need for doing something when something else fails or falls out of life. Yeah. And a celebration in 2025.
So I know it's 20 years. That's just kind of
Yeah.
like, that's quite something. I know it's scary. I'm really, you know, that's
No,
stuff
it's an
that's
accomplishment.
yeah.
Jen, are you ready to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, I'm Jen. I design under the name Synaptic Stitches, and that is a cross between my background. So before I was a knitwear designer, I got my PhD in neuroscience and worked in neuroscience research for a while, and then decided that that was not the right thing for me at the end of 2019, and then just ran screaming into the pandemic, and trying to find a new job at that point was not going to happen. So I started leaning into what I love, and I really like, challenging myself and learning with every new pattern that I create or every new thing that I knit. So my designs are all there to like engage your mind and keep you interested in always learning something new. And I love both challenging knitters, but also like being a support system to help them realize that things that they might be intimidated by or might find overwhelming don't have to be, and that you can see anything out there that inspires you, that you're excited by. And like, my tagline is fearless knitting, like go into anything without any hesitation and try whatever makes you excited, because it's just yarn and needles or hooks or whatever, and with a little practice you can do whatever you're excited by.
Yeah, I love that, fearless knitting. I like that that's your motto. And I think people can resonate with the thought it's just yarn, but sometimes we forget, don't we?
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen. Shayna, I heard you're ready to introduce.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My family decided to call it that moment. Hi, I'm Shayna. My business is Shayna Lines Designs, and I've been designing knitting patterns since 2018, I think was my first pattern. I've been making things my whole life, and my background is I'm an architect and design educator. And I find that I combine everything I do all the time. So I'm interested in functional ways to enclose space. I'm interested in teaching and learning. And so a lot of my patterns are, I know Jen and I just actually met last week in a different group, and we were talking about her complexity with a lot of things. And a lot of stuff I do is kind of simple, but maybe the construction is a little different. The detail really matters. I think that's the architect brain in me wanting to know how the corner meets, how things happen. And then the challenge for me of figuring out how do I write it down in a way for someone to be able to learn how to make it in an asynchronous way. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Shayna. And we're so happy you're joining us today. Next question is, how do you begin a new design? Jen, can you start that question off for us?
So I feel like there's sort of two angles. One is like, how do you get inspired by things? And one is like, once you have your idea, what do you do with that? And I feel like my inspiration comes from like so many different places. It's been really random sometimes. One of my favorite ways to find inspiration is I love combining brioche and cables, right? So like this is one of my first sweaters, and I like going and finding like classic motifs that are in like old like fisherman sweaters or other like other designs by knitters working not in brioche, and seeing like how can I put my own spin on that? How can I find ways to interpret other designs in brioche? That's one thing I find really fun. And then once I have my idea, I'm very much a design on the needles person. So I have to swatch everything like a million times. It's not unusual for me to have like 8 or 10 swatches for a new sweater design. So it's really just start practicing with it and experimenting on the needles to see what I can make happen.
Thank you for sharing that. So how many swatches took it for this sweater to become a complete sweater?
The one I'm wearing, I think, only had 3. The one on the dress form behind me, I think has 6, and one of them is 8 inches wide and 6 feet long. So
Okay.
That one had a lot of difficulty to get it just how I wanted it.
I imagine that
Yeah.
was a lot of swatches.
Yes.
Shayna, how do you begin a new design?
Yeah, so and it's just like Jen, a lot of different ways. For me, the design has to solve a problem. And I feel like that sound actually now that I say that, that sounds weird. Um, I think design in general solves a problem, whether it's meeting the needs of a specific user, showcasing a yarn, keeping your head warm, whatever it is. And so I think about who my client is, I guess, and sometimes it's myself. And I think I want to show off this color. I want to cover my hands. I want to do something to coordinate with something. I want a functional piece for my house. And or if I'm working with a yarn dyer, I think about what are their values and how does that align with mine and how can I elevate both of us together. And so thinking about how my design approach can solve a particular need. A couple of years ago, I developed a bunch of little fidget toys that came out of sort of a desire to make small projects that people could finish in a short amount of time, tackle a few skills, and then maybe have learn a skill on like a very small, like, see, I told you I was going to lean over, like a little piece of something, right? And then not be intimidated to kind of say, okay, this is this little, I mean, you can see it's smaller than my hand, and it has a tubular cast on, a tubular bind off, and double knitting. And you can finish it in a couple hours. And so I've had people make this and say, oh, well, now I saw that technique in a more elaborate sweater, shawl, fill in the blank. I know how to do it on a small scale. So that's sort of a piece that excites me, is figuring out like how I could impart a skill, a lesson into something that feels digestible in a way.
Thank you. I love that. I've made a few of the pea pot fidgets, and I've made one I made one in a car drive from 19 minutes. So I was able to knit my niece, who was sitting beside me, a fidget
Oh,
during
that's so
the car
cool.
ride. Yeah. Okay, next up, Laurie, how do you begin a new design?
I guess it depends on what sort of design it is. If it's a garment, they're usually inspired by a stitch pattern that I think is really cool and I want to incorporate it, and then trying to figure out how like the construction needs to go with that stitch pattern or that color stuff. And so it's, there's a bit of swatching and then, a bunch of calculations. The fun stuff is when I'm doing like a shawl or other accessories, because that to me is more like art. I am taking a, artistic pattern, like, as if this is my canvas. I am painting with yarn. And so I'm doing a lot of drawing, I'm doing a lot of coloring, sketching and stuff like that, and then trying to figure out how to make the math work so that the shape ends up the way I want it to be, and stuff like that. So it's two very different processes, and I really love the artsy part of the one, and then I also like the functional part of the garments and stuff. So and they stimulate different parts of the brain, so I have a fair amount of both of those usually going on at the same time.
No, that's interesting how the same craft but different items also need a different process for you. Thank you for sharing. Wooly, you're up next.
For me, I think it's similar to Shana. I have a problem to solve, except my problems are slightly different. For me, it's how am I going to make this thing 3D? Well, how am I going to turn something that's caught my eye into a hat? How am I going to construct it? I approach design as a kind of like, I need to do something new for me to keep my brain ticking over. Otherwise, I'm going to get very, very bored. And, you know, it's one thing I like about hats is that they are one of the most three-dimensional garments that we can make. And with my history of kind of like engineering and sculpture combined, that's kind of like that mechanism meets really nicely. And so for me, it's a problem to solve, but the problem is more kind of like in here rather than an external kind of criteria that needs to be met. So I want to kind of like work out how I can do a technique, how I can construct a hat in a different way, how I'm going to make something bend or work in a different way. And where the inspiration comes from can be lots of different places. It can be the skinny yarn that just kind of goes, I want to be something. Or it might be something I see, but I never see I never kind of plan to make a finished design look like something. For me, designing is the process. That's what I'm all about. The hats are kind of almost like a byproduct. Okay, which is probably a bit of a weird thing to say for a lot of kind of like product knitters and designers, but I'm very, very process. And so my designing is about the process, and I'm more interested in seeing how the form will develop through the methods that I'm exploring rather than being confined to a shape or a form, if that makes sense. So yeah,
It makes sense.
Yeah, I just kind of see what I want to explore next. I've got a bunch of ideas and I kind of write them down and I kind of like pick which one kind of takes my fancy really.
And does it help that you design hats because they're quick? Well, depending on how quick you can make your idea and your problem
Yeah,
solving into
I've
a hat. But I imagine if it has to become a sweater, the boring.
boring kicks in really quickly. Yeah. I mentioned before that I'm autistic. I'm also ADHD, so you know that I've got that combination going on, and I actually don't have much interest in designing anything other than hats. I will knit myself a jumper occasionally, but as soon as kind of there's a large section of flat anything, I kind of
Step out.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I can't help it. It's just like, you know, that's just the way my brain works. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing. You all have some similarities and some different aspects in how your designs come to be. Speaking of designs, what was your hardest pattern to design up to now and why? Lori, we're going to start with you.
Okay, so that's an interesting question that I'm probably not going to answer properly. I the hardest pattern is always the first time you're doing something. So, you know, my first garment, that was like crazy hard at the time. And then the next time is like, okay, when I did a garment with set-in sleeves, you know, and figuring out how to do that, that was the hardest one to do at the time. Or anytime I'm using unconventional shaping, that's the hardest thing because it's new and it's different. And once you've done it, you're like, okay, I can do this again, no problem. But learning how to do the things, and I really enjoy that because I'm an engineer in my day job, so solving problems is actually a lot of fun. The hardest one, yeah, that's the thing. It's like anytime there's something really crazy going on in the design, like interesting shaping and stuff like that, and then also not only to make it happen, but then to make it easy for users to make it, because you can have the exact same design and it can be like almost impossible for anybody other than a super advanced user to be able to do it. Or you can make simple little changes to it to make it like just easy to remember so that the person isn't like seriously looking at the pattern for every single stitch that they're doing on the row and stuff like that. So that didn't answer
Are you out to
your
translate the
question.
hard How to translate a hard bit into an accessible pattern.
Yeah, and like not even just translating it, but also like going, how can I make minor changes that give the same result but are way easier for people to understand? So that sort of thing, getting an easy repeat versus, something that changes every row or something like that. So,
And if you have to pick a hardest design right now, something you struggle with right now.
Okay, so this past year I made 2 set-in sleeve cardigans. One was in fingering weight, one's in DK weight, and honestly, getting the set-in sleeves to look just so, especially across the entire range, and that would be my Sequoia and my manuscript cardigans. They both use that set-in sleeve, and they look gorgeous, but like the Sequoia one, I think it took me 2 years from the time I swatched to the time I actually had it out on the market, because getting those sleeves right took a lot of learning and figuring out and stuff. So
Thank
there
you
we
for
go.
sharing. Josiane, who has been a host for some of the audio video panels, will definitely post links to those 2 cardigans in the chat thread. And so everyone can admire how you succeeded in set-in sleeves for Tunisian crochet. Wooly, what's your hardest pattern? It's been your hardest pattern to design.
That's quite funny because when I was reading the questions ahead of the email, I had a very similar answer to Laurie, is that the hardest one is the one I'm currently working on because I've got to work out how I'm going to do it. Especially when you set yourself a challenge each time of a new construction, that is your hardest thing to work out, how you're going to do it, how you're going to approach this. But if I want to talk about in general, looking at my back catalogue, I'm just going to do a fancy thing and switch over to the overhead.
Let me spotlight you.
This collection is probably the hardest one. This is my Lateralis collection, and this one is called Chiral. And this is a completely unusual way of designing hats. And so it's knitted sideways, but all the shaping is done with increases and decreases. And then there's short row color work going on in it as well. So I had to kind of like work out how to make that fit a head and a hat, kind of like. So that's probably one of the hardest collections that I've done. And it's sort of, I have found that the more challenging constructions to me and the things that I find the most challenging to design don't always translate to my bestsellers. Unfortunately, that collection is one of my worst selling collections, because I think I probably pushed myself too far, and a lot of people kind of can't work it out, or I don't know, they don't see the construction as easily. But yeah, I actually find that happens quite a lot, that sometimes the more challenging constructions don't necessarily get taken up as often. So I'm kind of quite keen on bridging that gap between what I see as a challenge in design and making it more accessible to other people, to not just in terms of writing the instructions, but actually breaking down the different steps and sort of saying, this is actually just this and this and this, and it's not something that's kind of like as intimidating as it might seem.
In a follow-up question, you sometimes have designs that start from the basic and build up to more advanced. Is that something you did with this particular design as well? Is there a hat design that leads up to this to bridge that gap you're talking about?
I do a lot of sideways knit hats anyway. That's something I'm known for. But I think even those, I mean, things like some of my, I don't think I've got it not have here. I'm gonna do the fancy overhead thing again. There you go. This is Toff, which is my best-selling pattern ever. It doesn't quite fit on the screen. That's it half. There's it folded in half. This is my best-selling pattern ever, and it's taken a while for it to gain momentum because it is all sideways. So in my head, this already bridges the gap to the other ones, but actually it doesn't necessarily work like that.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I need to do better is to actually kind of, as I say, break that down and break the steps down and sort of say that, you know, there is an awful lot in common with the first one, which seems much more complicated, and this one, which is maybe medium complicated. I don't like to consider things complicated or not, because I think skills levels are kind of redundant. They're really subjective. So I'd sooner kind of like talk about what skills are involved and how the construction works and approach it that way.
Which brings us back to Jen's fearless knitting. It's just yarn. Try it out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Jen, can we move the question your way? What's the hardest pattern you've designed?
Helps if I remember to unmute myself. I thought about this question a little bit differently. Like, yes, that every time you're tackling something new, there are challenges. But for me, I've had a couple of designs that stood out recently. One of them being the Bombini cardigan, because I did have, so I'm going to turn this around so you can see the back. So going through this, like I'm transitioning back and forth between, this is a double brioche cable and these are single brioche cables, and here's double. And so I had a idea in my head of like a broad vision, sort of the feeling I wanted it to have and the flow and like the elements I wanted to incorporate, but actually figuring out how to create a stitch pattern that gave that feeling and gave that vague idea that was in the back of my head actual life was really, really hard, which is why I ended up with that 6-foot long swatch, because I started with a stitch pattern and it wasn't quite right. And I tried another and I tried another and I just kept going until I got something that sort of felt right. And then I did another swatch that was even big, like, well, it was like a 10 by 10 to try and actually narrow it down. And so this one just, it was getting those details and just tweaking things until it matched how I wanted. I also have a pattern that it's not published yet, that is with my tech editor right now, that the design of it, like the actual knitting and creation of it, was easy, and then figuring out how to translate that into accessible instructions, like that's one of the things I've been battling with. Just other people have talked about is in my head there's a formula, but how do I convert what seems like a very straightforward formula in my head to a written instruction that anyone can follow and that you don't need to have gone through the conceptualization phase with me in order to understand the written pattern, and that's a challenge.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think the designers recognize that it's, how do you translate what's in your mind and then in yarn to a pattern in a PDF. Yeah, thank you. Shayna, what's your hardest design so far and why?
Yeah, can I just add, I'm just loving listening to all the answers right now. Like I had an answer and then I've changed it and I've had like 3 different things. And so you're going to have to cut me off probably. So one thing that I was just thinking about, just sort of adding to what Jen just said about translating into a pattern. I was thinking, I told you I'm a design educator. I teach architecture students, and I've had a lot of situations that there's something that I love about what I do there, that I create a prompt, an assignment, something, and I kind of say, here, do your thing. And I have in my head something I think people are going to do, and it doesn't always happen, right? And so sometimes I'm like, is the wording a little off? Did I, not really convey the idea? And I think about that in my patterns too. I think sometimes there's people and they say to me, tell me where to put the stripes, right? And others are going to go, ooh, I get to put them wherever I want. And I think my patterns are simple. And I think I try to give someone a way to say, you can put the stripes here, or you can do whatever you want, and have both people meet the rubric, if you will, to sort of speak to my teaching mind. So when I thought about this question, there's like a few different answers. One of them is like two particular designs that one design, it's a ruana, which is like a poncho sort of, but it's like a sweater thing, and it's called Semantics. And the because I was like, what is this thing called? And so I called it Semantics, which is sort of like what it's called. And but I started creating it when I was meeting with a former architecture student, and she and I had lunch one day, and I went in and looked at her firm downtown because I kind of thought, like, should I ever go back to this world? And it was funny because after we left the meeting, I was like, nope, that's not it, right? Like that ship has sailed. But then the project ended up being a lot harder for me because I ended up working on it towards the end of my mom's life. And then I had to put it down. Like I literally remember holding it in my hands and then I had to put it down. And so it's not a great seller. It looks at things in a slightly different way, but it was like a really pivotal design for me. It was really important to actually get it out and sort of like take a deep breath, right? Um, Other hard designs are two that are staring at me that you can't see because I finished a garment that I put on and it didn't fit right. And so I do a lot of things like I'll make study models of things, which I think are kind of somewhere in between swatches and like what I do in architecture, which is making scale models, but I'll make like full scale mock-ups. So I'll take like polar fleece and try it in the right shape, or I'll take like old bed sheets and different things. And sometimes it's like the fabric doesn't quite work. So Wooly, when you were talking, I was thinking like the gauge matters so much and the integrity of the fabric and all these things. It's like we're these design scientists and we have like this kitchen of ingredients, right? And sometimes for me, I get all the way to the end and then I'm like, nope, that was the wrong thing that I put in first, right? And so things take a long time. And so then I'll just say the other sort of, so these other pieces, they're just not quite right. I finished an entire one. And my last one is one that I mentioned to a few of you last week on a Zoom that I had the opportunity to design with some hand spun yarn, which is a newer hobby for me. And the hand spun yarn, I had to basically make the design without having the yarn. And then I got the yarn, and the yarn was not what I thought it would be. And so there was a challenge because I think, like Jen, I design on the needles a lot. Like I'll sketch and then I'm like, oh, I have to hold it. And it was really hard to figure out, like, I don't actually have the thing in hand to feel it. So yeah, those are my long answers.
Well, they're all three hard things. If you have how do you say that? If something from outside influences your design idea, that like how the yarn behaves or the yarn you receive, an emotional impact on designs can also happen. Yeah, or thank you for sharing, Shayna. We're going to stick with you with the next question. And that is, how do you keep up your motivation during the testing and or writing stage of a design?
Yeah, so a lot of times I end up making another sample with my testers while they're testing. I'm actually making one like right now for a design that got a little bit behind where I had intended it to be. And so I'm kind of I'm working on that as the testers are working on their piece of a design. I think sometimes I definitely get in my own way because, like I said, I have a few of these garment pieces that have fallen to the backside because I'm not great with calendar planning. I know some people are really great with saying, well, I have to have it done by this date to test it by this to hit this season. And I feel like I keep blowing it. And so like I have a piece that I actually had like a photo memory pop up and I was like, that was 1 year ago and it's still sitting there like flat, blocked. I haven't done anything with it. And so I think just sort of when I feel a connection to something about the story of the piece, I guess that helps me to move it through when I think about being able to share it with others, I guess. And so sometimes I guess for me, I do make a lot of pieces that I finish them and then I'm like, that's never going to be a design. Like it's a thing I had to make and that's it, right? It's done. And so when I feel a stronger connection, like I think, oh, I can't wait to share that with someone. Yeah, I don't know. There's like an urgency that I guess helps me think like I want to share this with other people. I think they will be excited about it. And so I might be sort of jumping a little bit to maybe a newer thing. But in the last year, I've gotten into hand spinning. And that has been something that I've been learning about spinning and learning about. I mean, there's so much to learn, right? And learning about making my own yarn. A lot of I'm lucky enough to have a lot of people knit my designs with hand spun yarn. And for years they've told me that, oh, Shayna, your designs work really well for hand spun yarn. So I thought, why? Why is that? So I've been trying to learn, and I get excited just seeing the colors that people pick, I guess, and the ways that people interpret my words still make the thing that I created, but actually create it in a very personal way. That and everything I create, that's actually probably the most exciting thing to me, whether it's during the test phase or when it's published.
Yeah, so in summary, going to try with the summary. You keep your motivation because you gear up on how other makers will make your design and interpret it and use yarn or colors.
Yeah, I think so. It's funny because I go on, you meet a lot of different people in the fiber arts world, and I always hear a lot of people that they'll come through and they'll kind of say that they're actually quite introverted, and I was like, I'm probably one of the most extroverted people you'll ever meet, like that I'm just like in everyone's business, and I love, like, probably by the end of this video panel I'll have more energy than I did at the start, and a lot of people will be like, okay, I'm done, and I'm like, no, let's keep going. So it's like the people, it's getting to sort of see the people, I guess.
Thank you. Wooly, how do you keep your motivation going during testing or writing?
How do I keep my motivation going?
Without it becoming boring.
Yeah, I mean, the real answer is that I struggle with that big time. I just don't. It's the reason why I work on small things, because my brain moves on to the next thing. I get bored incredibly quickly, which is not always a bad thing because it means I'm off exploring something new again. But if I don't do the pattern writing immediately, and I'm another one that does a lot of designing on the needles, I have to work out construction and see how it's going to be and work as it goes. I can write a pattern ahead without knit, but I get bored again, so I have to have that kind of like hand motion thing going on. But if I don't do the pattern writing straight away, then it just doesn't get done. End of. It's not even a matter of I can come back to a year later. It just gets put on a pile and will be ripped out a year later, maybe, when I find it on the pile of things that are unfinished. That's it. That's the only way I've been able to do it, and this is the reason why I self-publish. I can't work to anybody else's deadlines. I really, really struggle submitting to deadlines and other things because I have health issues. I've got a brain that doesn't want to conform to various other things. I have to be able to work at that pace and work in the way that works for me. So yeah, I have to do it straight away, otherwise it doesn't happen. It just feels like a really blunt, hard thing to say, to admit. But that's what's kept me going for nearly 20 years, is that I had the idea, I work it out, I write the pattern, and then I go, hi, tech editor, this is it. And we work from there. So yeah. I don't find the pattern writing process difficult. I mean, I've had enough practice, and it's not something that I hate. It's just kind of like, if I don't do it, it just gets left and my brain's moved on to something else. That's just.
It sounds like you're really aware of your.
I am aware of my own needs and how I need to accommodate myself. Yes, I am. And it's taken a while, because when I first started designing, I mean, so I was publishing patterns back in 2005 when self-publishing was a very new thing, and new paths were being forged, and I was working amongst an entirely different designing environment than what there is now, and it was hard then to be somebody that actually couldn't work to deadlines and couldn't kind of like write the pattern first, or couldn't do this and couldn't do that. And it took me a long time to get confidence in my process and realize that actually this isn't a bad way to work. Everybody works differently, and this is also me accommodating my own needs when I do it. Yeah.
Good for you. Yeah, and thanks for paving the road for a lot of us self-publishing designers nowadays. Thank you. Next up, Lori.
So honestly, not too terribly different than Wooly in some ways on like the pattern writing thing. When I am creating, like I sketch things out, but then I need to create my sample and I take, you know, a bunch of notes in my shorthand while I'm doing it so that I know what I'm doing. But when it comes down to pattern writing, it's literally I sit down and I just plow through it. It's one session. You know, if it's something small, I can do it in an hour or two. Otherwise, you know, it's like you just sit and you go, and I have to do it that way, and then it's done. And then I can, you know, go back to playing with yarn and doing something else, and, you know, as it's off to tech editing and stuff like that. So it's not really it's just sit down, concentrate, go. And so there isn't a time to get bored with it. I know if it got drawn out over multiple days and stuff, I would forget what I had been doing and all those things. So it needs to be a one go. For testing, testing is kind of like a mini Cal. You know, I have, you know, a fabulous group of testers. It's, you know, it's slowly grown over the years, but I have a lot of regulars who come back, and it's actually really kind of joyous to be able to see them creating my stuff, and we have a good relationship. So when they give me feedback, it's, you know, I know where they're coming from, they understand what I'm doing, and it's a really lovely symbiotic relationship, I think, with my testers. And so that keeps it, you know, from growing old, shall we say. And sometimes it's like, I have designs like Shayna where it's like, I don't know if this really needs to see the light of day, but like some of the testers are like, oh, that looks fun. And I'm like, that also helps me motivate. Okay, I will make sure that I will actually put this one out.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing and being part of your community. I can attest to that. The tester environment in your community is really nice and friendly. Yeah, and thank you. Jen, you're the last one for this question. How do you keep your motivation during the writing and testing?
So I, you know, feel like I have this perception of like the community thinks there's a right way to write a pattern or to go through this process. And you know, I haven't been designing for that long. It's only 4 years. So I feel like I'm still always refining my process and what I'm doing. And I've had this like idea that like, oh, ideally I want to always have, you know, like one thing that I'm designing on the needles and one thing that I'm writing, and one thing that's in tech editing and one thing that's in testing, so that like at any given time I'm always ready to be producing the next, you know, releasing the next pattern because there's always something in that process. And I've said that for a long time and I never do it. And it just isn't what like works for me, and that like I can't really maintain that process. And I find that like when I'm trying to say like, oh, I've got this in this stage and this in this stage, and I should be writing a newsletter and doing a social media post and have all these other you know, keeping up my accounting and whatever other tasks I have for my business, and I'm trying to like do a little of all of them, I feel like I do nothing. I don't actually accomplish anything, and trying to task switch doesn't work for me. And so like what really has been effective in getting things done for me is feeling like, okay, maybe I designed a shawl that I knit over the summer, and like I'm writing it right now and I am knocking that out. And it's like that is just my focus, is like I have to just like say, okay, I'm gonna have a dedicated week, and like this week I'm gonna churn out getting that pattern written for that design that maybe has been sitting in the pile for 6 months, but like I will open up my notebook, I'll go back to, you know, I take copious notes while I'm knitting my sample, and like I have to have these binge sessions where maybe I neglect some other things I should be doing. but it's all about like these concentrated bursts for me of like just knock it out and get it done and set a deadline for myself so that I focus and really get that work done. Because when I try and say, oh, I have all this to do, nothing happens.
Well, it sounds like you two are very self-aware of your needs, and you changed tactics when you discovered that that structure of having something in each phase didn't work for you.
Didn't work. Yeah.
Good. I'm going to check the time, so I'm going to ask you, the designers, to keep their answer a little bit shorter on the next one, but it's a lovely question, so I'm going to ask it. Do you try to find your niche in designing versus just designing what you want to make? Wooly, let's start with you.
I'm sorry, this one did make me laugh because, like, you know, to find your niche, and it's just kind of like I've been designing hats for 20 years, so I think I might have done. But it kind of like the answer is already kind of like been explained in previous questions anyway. It's what kind of like I am designing what I want. I'm doing what my brain wants to do, and that's to explore this thing. And the hat is the kind of the byproduct of what I'm experimenting with. I actually want to give a talk next year on it's never just a hat, because I think some people, one of the reasons why I think some of my more challenging patterns don't work is because people just think it's just a hat, and then they get intimidated by that. Whoa, it's completely changed. And I want to break down that idea that it's just a hat, because it never is. It's always a three-dimensional engineered garment. It's just kind of like so yeah, I'm right up there with you for a short answer for that one, because that's I've already found my niche and I do what I want.
Yeah, I think it's a lovely question. Someone submitted it when we
Yeah,
asked
it's a good question.
for questions, and well, you are definitely known for your hats, so we can definitely say you have a niche. Laurie, do you think you have a niche, or do you design for a niche?
Well, I think Tunisian crochet, the entire craft, is niche. So there's that, yes. I also only do wearable things, so garments, accessories, and stuff like that. So within that, it's a niche. You're never going to find me designing a pillow or, you know, a Maguri, like that. That's just not my thing. So I like things that are practical. So I would say, yes, I definitely have a niche.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for keeping it short. Tunisian crochet is expanding, though. I think when you started, it was really small, but it is expanding and gaining popularity. So maybe if you want to keep a niche, you might need to a little bit more. Jen, do you have a niche, or do you design? Well, you only have brioche designs, if I'm
I
correct.
do. Yeah. I only have brioche designs, and I'd say probably about 3/4 of my designs are brioche cables. And I didn't plan that that was going to be my niche, but I was given a gift of a pattern that used the technique that was published back in 2011. And as far as I knew at the time I started designing, it was the only brioche cable pattern in existence. I couldn't find any others, and now other people are doing it as well. But I sort of fell in love with it, and had the thought of like, well, I'll start here and then I'll go to other things. And the ideas for what I'm doing just have kept flowing. So I've never felt the need to go somewhere else.
Do people find you because of your niche? Or do they
I think some
stay
people,
because of it?
yeah, I think that I definitely have people who found that like I do intricate things and they really love that like the way I put things together. Sometimes I wonder like, could I have a bigger audience, or could I sell more patterns if I did something that was less niche and that was more like seen as accessible? People weren't intimidated, but then like I go back to my core people who are there and have been with me since I started, and who, when I try and design something that's a little bit simpler, they're bored. So, I at this point, it's what I love doing, and so I'm just going to keep leaning in.
Smart choice. Shayna, Do you think you have a niche in your designing, or do you just do what you want?
I was laughing when Lori was like, I'm never going to make a pillow. I was like, Lori, my pillows are totally functional. Right. But, no, I really, I feel like my designs, are very simple. I feel like they meet different needs for like the members of my life, I guess. And so is it a niche? I guess like, I sort of feel like I'm a simple, I feel, I feel like I'm a simple person in what I do and what I create, that they solve different problems, that they have certain skills. I can only make something that like I know how to model or use or fashion in my life. I can really only design for myself, I guess, like, which I don't know, that sounds kind of, now that I said it out loud, it sounds weird, but the amazing thing, and I think like the designers here have shared, we're using the same materials and we all have something totally unique, which is still, it's just amazing, right? Like there's space for everyone. So, I, I had someone test a pattern of mine once and sort of came back and said, well, what if you wrote it like this? And what if you added this? And what if you added this? And I kind of had a thought, like, there was nothing actually that this tester found that was wrong. But I said, I don't think you care for my writing style, right? Which was like kind of valid. Like sometimes you read a book, you watch a movie, and I can say like that. I know that everyone likes that, or not everyone, but I know that a lot of people like that. It's not for me, right? So I sort of feel like I have to be comfortable knowing I can design what feels good to me. And I hope continue to meet people who are interested in what I have to offer.
Thank you. I love that sentiment that you said about sometimes there's nothing wrong with the pattern, but the writing or the way they are reading your pattern just doesn't work. It's just like indeed a book or a movie. It's a really good uh, thing to remember as a designer, that you're not for everyone.
Or like, eating a certain food, right?
Yeah.
If everyone's like raving about a certain thing, and I'm like, I was in a group discussion before that someone shared about her design work, and I sort of nodded along and I thought the whole thing. Then I thought the particular thing that she was designing doesn't resonate with me, but I know that the patterns are great and there's like a ton of people who love them. It's like I'm not going to end up wearing that thing. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it. Like you can recognize value and worth in really good quality without wanting to put it on myself.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the community, I don't know, I just think it's, I have a friend that I've sort of shared with, we're like, this is a big place, right? And you can feel, I know I can feel tunnel vision of like, nobody likes me, or like everyone's looking at that, or everyone's talking about whatever. And then it's like, we don't all know the same things and the same people, and I don't know, there's room, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, let me check the time. So we have 6 minutes left if we stick to the hour. I have a final question, and I hope to have some room for questions from the audience if there are any. So I'm already going to point out to the audience that if you have a question, you can already type it in the chat box so we can pick that up after the final question I'm going to ask you all. And that is, what are we going to see from you next? What can we expect from you in 2025? Jen.
Again, have to unmute. The first thing I have a hat in testing right now. That's a brioche cabled hat. I've had a lot of fun with, I discovered grafting brioche and creating like brims that go in one direction and then hats that are knit off them in another direction. And I've really enjoyed playing with this idea. And then there will be a pair of matching mittens that come out. This is with my tech editor, the hats in testing. So that'll be the first thing coming in 2025.
That's gorgeous. Thank you for
Thank
sharing.
you.
It's nice that indeed you say, I discovered how to graft in the brioche. So a new technique to add to the fearless knitting.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, Wooly, what can we expect in your anniversary year?
Oh, a lot. I'm going to Vogue Knitting Live in January to teach. I've got lots of teaching on next year, lots more virtual teaching. I have a collection out in January, which is hats that are, I am trying to, because short row color work is a technique that I've been exploring for a long time. I had a new book out earlier this year with Soho Publishing, which has done exceptionally well. And
I have it.
do you have it? Yay! So the collection I've got coming out in January is short row colorwork hats, but trying to make it a little bit more accessible with, let me just put so simpler motifs on a simpler construction. So try and make short row colorwork more accessible. There we go. So it uses the techniques, but the construction is simpler. So there's less short rows, more easier hat construction to try and kind of like bridge that gap between some of the more complex techniques and make it into hats. So yeah, lots of hats and lots of teaching.
Back to the bridge we discussed earlier. So how do we make something that looks complex accessible? Thank you. Shayna, what can we expect?
Sure. I'm making a sample right now that goes with this piece over here. So this is coming out in January. This is my first time working with my own hand spun yarn. And so this is like a big, I'm wearing another cowl. I'm going to take that one off. So this is like a big double wrap reversible cowl that I've designed with cesium yarn, and I spun the yarn for the contrast color. So this is a piece that I got a little behind where I intended to be. And so then I ended up designing headbands to go with it too, because I don't think the testers have quite enough time to work through that. This will be coming out in January. And then I'm hoping, I guess I'm just going to put it out in the world right now. I'm hoping to actually work on something with this yarn right here. And I'm just going to show you so that maybe that means I'll actually do it. So this is the first 8 ounces of yarn that I spun. Sorry, I have other yarn that I've spun, but this is my first time spinning 8 ounces of yarn. I mentioned that I have a garment piece that is staring at me over there. And it occurred to me I would like to, because unlike some of you who take great notes along the way, I take mediocre notes along the way. And I would like to knit this piece again. Actually, I think it would be a great candidate for this hand spun yarn. I have a little bit of knitting, teaching, and other events that I'm working on as well, and just sort of continuing to kind of just be myself, I guess, is really the best I can say.
Thank you. Thank you. And how cool that you have spun yarn and want to use it in a design. And then the first one is already coming with your hand spun yarn. Yeah, I think you've only been spinning like the past year, right?
Yeah, I've been spinning, I think just about 12 months. Like I started in the summer of 2023 with a spindle, and I wasn't quite connecting with it. And so I actually think I finished, yeah, maybe even less than a year. But this was like one of the first things I made, which is one of my fidget toys with my own green yarn, which was very exciting. To be able to make like the pea pod green in the pea pod thing. So I've been accumulating yarn, and I've been figuring out, this is the whole new thing for me to figure out. Like I know how to specify the yarn that is, you know, a DK weight commercial yarn, whatever, with wool content. And now this is a new thing that I feel like it's another language I'm learning. And I'm only just learning it.
Well, thank you for sharing. Lori, what are we going to see from you next?
I guess next year is going to be an interesting year for me because I know my day job's going to get really busy. So there's a handful of designs that are going to come out in the first of the year that like are already in the works. A mixture of garments and various accessories, kind of similar to what we've done, I've done in the past. I do have a couple what I'm calling skill builder sets because Tunisian crochet is a little niche and there are sub things within it like, you know, Tunisian in the round, Tunisian cables that seem to intimidate people. So I'm working on getting some sets to gradually get people comfortable with these techniques so they can create, you know, feel a lot more confident and have a lot more patterns accessible to them, both mine and other Tunisian designers. And the one really exciting thing is I have a Tunisian crochet stitch dictionary coming out sometime August, September this year, next year, 2025. So there isn't, unlike knitting, there aren't a bunch of stitch dictionaries out there. They're usually pretty tiny. So this one's going to hopefully knock everybody's socks off.
Thank you for sharing that little note because I did know that already as being part of your community, but I'm really, really excited for a Stitch Dictionary in Tunisian crochet. I think it will fill a gap that's missing. If we see how many stitch dictionaries there already are for crochet and knitting and how much potential Tunisian crochet has. So thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
I have one question from a participant, and I'm only going to do that one because we all are already over time. But I know you mentioned, sorry, you all mentioned having a little bit of space. So Doug is asking, with your business being yarn related, what do you do to relax hobby-wise? Is it also yarn related or is it totally different? And you each get a really short amount of time to answer. Who's first? Wooly.
I'll go. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Laurie. I don't. That's the thing. I think that you don't when I don't know, maybe it's different for me because my business grew out of something that I was already doing as a hobby anyway, because and my business grew because it was a need to earn an income rather than a conscious business choice. But I actually kind of like, I don't find knitting relaxing as something that I do as a hobby. I'm still trying to actually fill that gap 20 years on, if I'm honest. It's hard. I actually, when it becomes a day job, it changes it completely. It really does. So yeah, I don't know. Drink wine and watch telly. Don't know.
Perfect hobbies. They sound relaxing, so that's important. Laurie, you also had an answer ready.
Okay, so I do have a day job, and so the designing is to some extent relaxing to me. I do enjoy it a lot, but what I do without yarn, I really enjoy hiking. So I live actually pretty close to forest land, so I spend a decent amount of time outside in the outdoors. I enjoy gardening, also hanging out in the outdoors, and then I enjoy cooking, using the stuff in the garden and making fun food from it. So those are my hobbies.
Thank you for sharing. That sounds like your weekend is always packed. Shayna or Jen, do you have something to add to that question, Shayna?
Yeah, I'll pop in. I do enjoy hiking as well. My son asked me, he said, "Do you take a day off?" And I was like, "Not really," because you're always kind of thinking of things. I will say though, I was thinking, Willie, when you were answering, that I have somehow, and I kind of resisted learning for a while, but for me, learning spinning within the last year was a thing of adding this other sort of like fiber adjacent piece. I have previously in my life, I've thrown pottery like on the wheel, and I've turned wood on a lathe, neither of which is super accessible to me right now, just in terms of the equipment. And so spinning, although I resisted it for a while, once learning, I was like, I can actually have that in my home or on the go. And it has this, yeah.
As soon as you start producing yarn though, it's kind of like, oh, now what hat can I make with it? That's where
Oh, no, Well, that's where I am right now. And that's
Yeah.
why I said I held this one up and I was like,
Yeah.
I kind of held it up next to something. I weighed something and I thought this is actually going to work for a design piece. And but the actual moment, I guess I can, like, I've been knitting while we're talking, right? And so I can knit and talk. I can knit, you know, with my family and, you know, watch TV or listen to something or do whatever, or small things I can knit while I'm hiking. When I'm spinning, I need both hands. And like I need to actually focus on it. And so for me, it has been this like slight sort of quarter turn refocus that allows me to feel like I am taking a break, even though, yeah, no, then I'm like, what can I do with the yarn? Yeah. So
It's less double. You can less double task when you are spinning. Sounds like. Jen, did you have something to add to that question?
Yeah, so I this year holiday season with the Yarnalong decided I was going to let myself knit something by another designer because I do that so infrequently these days because anytime I have time to have needles in my hands, I feel like I need to be working on a design project. I was like, I'm going to do something really relaxing and I'm going to knit something by another designer. And I actually realized that it took way more brain power than it does for me to do my own designs. And it was actually much harder. So that was, yeah, not something I realized I'd gotten that into like into my brain. But yeah, I do still find relaxation out of knitting my own stuff. But I also um I love hiking. I love dancing. I met my husband swing dancing. Um, and so actually a lot of my time right now, I had to have ankle surgery this summer. So I'm doing a lot of physical therapy and a lot of exercise to try and get back into being able to do all those things because I do miss going out and knitting. I sit and I'm on the couch with my needles and then need to get up and use the rest of my body.
Yeah, I had a broken ankle last year during the Fasten Off Yarnalong, so I can imagine how how do you say that? What's the word? Challenging it is when your legs don't work properly, probably to do your hobbies. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you everyone for coming out, especially to our designers, Shayna, Lori, Wooly, and Jen. We hope you all enjoyed today's designer video panel, and we hope you check out the Fasten Off Yarnalong schedule for more events and activities. The end is drawing near, but it's been a great fifth edition so far. So I hope, hopefully, we'll all see you return next year. I'm going to post your websites again in the chat for anyone wanting to click on them right now. And then we're going to end the recording. Thank you for showing up.
Thank you for hosting, Marika.
You're welcome.
And it's nice to meet everyone.
My mouse isn't doing what it should be doing.
thank you,
Really,
Maria.
are you able to restop the recording? Because my mouse, I got it. Yes.